Hello, everybody. I'm glad to hear conversation going and to see that you've eaten. I hope you feel fed. I hope you don't have the itis and will be like sleeping now when Bulelwa and Evaan present. But I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Bulelwa Lomusa Kunene. I've known her a very long time. She's from Eswatini, and she's an artist. She did her BFA at Ringling in the States, and after that she did a residency outside of New York, and then she returned home to Eswatini, to 𝘎𝘢𝘭𝘢 Gallery, where she worked there. So that was what she did before she joined the curatorial department of the Zeitz MOCAA. Bulelwa has held us together through the Sala curatorial process. She really, kept us in line anytime we were diverting. And she's a brilliant mind. So I hope you, enjoy her presentation.
Hi, everyone. So for my presentation, I'm going to be talking a little bit about performance. And that was sort of what my research was based in. And I want to take this opportunity to sort of like pick out my personal highlights from what I wrote. It's been a really nice opportunity to go back to my research and figure out what worked and what didn't. And I think I would like to show you what I think worked. So these are two quotes from Diana Taylor, and they've sort of grounded my exploration of performance and performance as a medium and my exploration of its potency, not just within art as a means of producing knowledge, but also in its potency within wider mechanisms of understanding and processing cultural knowledge in the past and present. For me, I was struck by artists who used performance to speak to practices that are culturally embedded or access some aspect of the past. It kind of goes without saying that the body is an integral aspect of the production and our experience of performance. And this isn't limited to the immediate engagement with the performer's race or sex or class body, but also gives us a chance to see beyond the performer into a past, a collective memory, a lineage of practice and knowledge that is performed again and again with each restaging of the performance event. So as you went into Sala with Mona's presentation, you would have seen 𝘎𝘢𝘀𝘀𝘍, which is a sound piece by the Cape Town-based Tanya Peterson. So that was sort of my case study with my research. And although my research spoke quite directly to that piece of work, what you're going to see is some of the other work that I encountered in my research that sort of led me down a path that forced me to question ephemerality, memory, and tangibility, especially within performance practices that are based around aspects of collective memory and embodied cultural practice. So the first time I encountered 𝘎𝘢𝘀𝘀𝘍 was in a listening session we had with Tanya Peterson in the early stages of our work with Sala. I had been stressed out about performance and the research was stressing me out, and so I was really struggling with the idea of ephemerality and performance, and one of the critiques that I got was that I was accessing it in a way that was a little bit limited and isolated from the actual practice and the artist's intention. So each time I'd be like, performance art resists circulation, and then I'd be like, what then? What else does it do? And so when I heard 𝘎𝘢𝘀𝘀𝘍, it felt like a really important access point into understanding the possibilities of performance, and specifically on the continent as well. So for some background into the work, this is a screen grab of the performance that happened on the 18th of March 2022, and it was staged in the atrium bowl of the museum. So 𝘎𝘢𝘀 was a performance of a 𝘎𝘢, or in English, a remembrance, a kind of music that is performed only in domestic or sacred spaces in Sufi Islamic tradition. 𝘎𝘢 was performed by two Cape Town-based Sufi choirs, the Young Men Sporting Cape Malay Choir and 𝙬𝘀𝘀𝘀𝘿 Nasheed Group, excuse my pronunciation, which made a choir of 28 men who sang the litanies and performed the accompanying breathwork in the atrium of the museum for a live audience. 𝘎𝘢 was conceived as a way to trace histories and genealogies of Islamic litanies across the Indian Ocean, traveling through southern Africa to West and North Africa, then to the Middle East and Malay archipelago. The sonic intervention is one that responds directly to the post-colonial moment and seeks to upend established and often Islamophobic notions of the history and development of Islam, as well as connect narratives and experiences of forced and unforced migration and slavery. The performance asks the audience to consider the migratory roots of the 𝘎𝘢, a song or sonic cultural practice that often takes on the personality and embodies the history of the specific geography in which it finds itself. In my research around Sufi practices, when speaking to Tanya Peterson's work, a specific scholar named Daniel Atesh Sonborn wrote that in many cases, the music is transplanted whole from the native culture of the teacher, who brings it along with him to a new community, like baggage carried by immigrants. The 𝘎𝘢 thus becomes a way in which roots of migration and moments of displacement can be traced through the sonic. So this is an image of 𝘎𝘢 as it exists now in Sala. And with thinking about tracing, using the sonic to trace roots of migration in performance and also in sonic artwork, I started to think about the body and the production of collective memory. The body, as it produces and translates the sonic, becomes an archive of this collective memory and a mechanism through which knowledge of it may be transmitted. Joseph Roach and Myron Beasley describe the body and performance in ritual spaces as opportunities for intersections that open up ways that individuals and communities can engage with the dead and their histories through the spiritual realm. This engagement with the dead makes evident the lineages and histories related to these specific ritual practices. They describe the performing body as a kind of medium, where the living body of the performer becomes a mediator of the voices and knowledge of the dead. In this way, the bodies of the living become ways of transmitting knowledge of the dead and of speaking and adding to the collective memory accumulated through generations. So when I was looking or exploring 𝘎𝘢, I was thinking about sort of what is hidden or what is forgotten within the sonic aspects of the work, and what histories exist or are embedded within the sound or within the bodies that have produced those sounds for the work. So when I was thinking about collective memory, I encountered the work of Paul Doolan, who speaks to the formation of the collective memory of both the Dutch as being part of the colonizer nation and Indonesians in their state and struggle as a colonized people. This was in his research of the conflicts between the Dutch and Indonesians during Indonesia's period of being colonized by the Dutch. Referencing Maurice Holbrook's, he believed that the development of memory is shaped by social frames of reference. Memory's connection to the social conditions of the body or the individual situated in these conditions dictates what can be remembered and what is forgotten. In his understanding of the work of collective memory in these conditions, Holbrook argues that even though it is the individual who remembers, the memories of the group, the individual who remembers does so as a group member. As opposed to forgetting, Doolan takes on the verb unremembering as a process that occurs in the production of collective memory, arguing that unremembering, is a process of concealment. Collective memory and its connections to performance is how I was able to sort of understand this production of knowledge through the body. And this is an excerpt from, what I'm about to read is an excerpt from Effigy in the Archive, Ritualizing Performance and the Dead in Contemporary South African Live Art Practice by Alan Parker. Ritual theorist Catherine Bell loosely defines ritual as a series of embodied activities that are perceived to transcend the present by connecting to values, knowledge, and traditions that are regarded as ancient and/or timeless. In passing down these ritual behaviors from one generation to the next, importance is often placed on their continued repetition and restoration in a markedly similar way through their framing as sacred activities. Towards this end, often strict socio-cultural rules and regulations regarding who can perform the ritual, how it must be performed, as well as where and when the ritual can occur, serve to limit and govern the manner in which the behavior is passed down and restored in future generations. So I'd like to show some of the work that I encountered when I was sort of looking at performance. And this first one is Bismillah. And this is a record of the performance by Ihsan Adams that occurred at the National Arts Festival in 2014. So I'll just show like a few minutes of it if the Wi-Fi allows. Yay! Sorry, could we have sound, please? So just to give a bit of context on what's happening, because I'm having issues with sound, this is a performance that is happening between Ihsan Adams and his father. And in this performance, Ihsan's father is performing a funerary rite or ritual that is preserved in Muslim culture. And this is sort of, I'm going to read a little bit about what I encountered about it. Bismillah is a record of a performance that I encountered in my reading of Alan Parker's writing in Acts of Transgression, and acted as a way for me to access the idea of displaced transmission as a phenomena in the recontextualization of ritualistic performance acts in foreign or maybe unfamiliar contexts. That is, outside of the context in which the ritual, sacred act, or ceremony that is being referenced in the performance. This was a helpful way for me to access our engagement with 𝘎𝘢𝘀 as a sound piece in Salah. So this is a practice that would usually or ordinarily be done in privacy. And in terms of what Alan Parker describes as displaced transmission, Ihsan's staging of it as a performance already sort of takes it out of the context of the ritual, recontextualizes it as a performance, and then further recontextualizes it spatially within the National Arts Festival. So when I was thinking through this concept of displaced transmission, I'm just going to stop that now, if it will. Okay. I will read a bit from my paper. In engaging with cultural and social practices with roots in the past, the performance act in contemporary spaces can be a way for artists to engage with the histories and ideologies embedded within cultural and social practices by decontextualizing them spatially. Displaced transmission describes instances where historical cultural behaviors are reinvented through their relocation and translation into different spaces, changing conditions and/or unfamiliar contexts or environments. Ritual, ceremonial, meditative, and other cultural practices experience a shift through being recontextualized through the intentional and particular act of performance. When framed in this way, they are then placed in conversation with the politics of space, the body, representation, and spectatorship. Space then plays a crucial role in the translation of these practices through the performance act. Spaces have their own politics, conditions, and social cultural symbolisms regulating acceptable and inappropriate behaviors. So some of the questions that I was thinking through when I was looking at Bismillah and this idea of displaced transmission were, what are the spatial politics of the museum? And which is a question that I think my fellows have also touched on in their previous presentations. So this is, how much time do I have? This is just a piece of work by 𝘎𝘢𝘻𝘍𝑜𝘍, and I sort of accessed this work when I was thinking through the sonic for Tanya Peterson's, I guess, recontextualization in Sala. So I'll just read a little bit about what I was reading through in my research for this work. Katja Jendrik, whose work I was reading in relation to 𝘎𝘍𝑜𝑍𝑍's work, forms an analysis of the sonic qualities of the performative interventions of Donna Kukama, Lerato Shadi, and 𝘎𝘍𝑜𝑍𝑍, which raises several important considerations for the work that the sonic does in the translation of performatic practices. Jendrik describes the voice as functioning as a fingerprint, an anachronistic marker that is bound to time constantly, carrying always an intimation of its historicity. To think through this idea of the imprint through time, it is then interesting to consider the sonic through the lens of situatedness that is presented by Jendrik, the social and cultural aspects that inform the production of a work. In the situatedness of Peterson's Yikr as a performance piece, responding to the post-colonial moment and looking to the Cape's difficult slave histories as they relate to the development of Islam in the region, the piece sits specifically in its discursive potential on histories of migration and displacement, but also in its active referencing of a sacred cultural and spiritual practice. The recorded sound is a temporal snapshot, working similarly to the performance act, but counter to the performance aspects of embodied cultural and social practices that are restaged and reperformed as part of an embodied transmission of cultural or social knowledge. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So I think for me, these are all sort of, they seem sort of disparate, but they all sort of fed into my understanding of Tanya Peterson's practice. And I just wanted to sort of show some of the work that I encountered during my research. This work is called Plantation Lullabies by 𝘎𝑎𝑠𝑡𝑖𝑐 𝑔𝑎𝑡𝑒, and it is the second installment in the 𝘎𝘢𝘮𝑜𝑛's Procession series, which is 4 collaborative performances organized by the artist. And they introduce unexpected and unexplored connections between sacred music, African and African American culture, and history, theater, world dance, and chant. I don't really have much to say about this one, except that I really like it and I want you all to experience it. So thank you so much. You can take the next feed and listen to this performance.
It's on. Hi. Hello. So I am very happy because my dream came true. I'm sharing a whiskey sour with everyone. So yeah, that's really nice. When I arrived Cape Town, I was searching for whiskey sours everywhere. I couldn't find it, and now they are here. So I would like to introduce our amazing fellow Evaan. Evaan comes from the Eastern Cape. He has a master's in fine arts. He's very creative. He loves graphic design and multimedia, and he's very, very passionate about things related to queerness. And yeah, I think, yeah. Evaan is also a really fun person. Like, he likes to go out. And yeah, I think I can say that. What else? Evaan is also placed in institutional advancement. And I think he was really happy there. And I cannot wait to see what he has to say. Welcome, Evaan.
Thank you, Anna. The reason I go out, as you'll see, it's all part of my research. So it's all leading to a PhD one day. Yes, okay. All right, so the title of my presentation is, there's still some more whiskey sours coming around for those of you who haven't received yet, by the way. But the title of my presentation is Pursuing Queer Futures. And specifically in my research, I wrote about Atipatra Ruga's performance video, Over the Rainbow, which I'm sure some of you guys have seen by now downstairs, hopefully. There's a lovely, nice red couch there designed by Anna, where you guys can, if you haven't seen it yet, I do encourage you to go and watch it. It's really a beautiful, striking, passionate, and colorful video performance. I first engaged this video performance during a curatorial meeting where we had watched a couple of the collection videos and was immediately taken aback by this piece of work by Ati. I do feel some sort of connection to Ati as well, as we both from the Eastern Cape, and Ati also has followed, or my journey as an artist or as a creative has followed just shortly behind Ati, in that we were in similar spaces at the same time. And so, yeah. All right. Cool. A silhouetted figure draped in silk, wearing a headdress with chandelier-type jewels, faces away from the audience as we follow to a backstage makeup mirror. Or vanity desk setup in a dark, empty void of a room. Ruga's voice over the ongoing ringing of a gong is heard saying, "Ndicela nizihlalisa kakuhle, vala amehlo, phefumla, khululeka, sebenzisa amehlo engqondo, uzibheka emazini olwandle kube ngathi, uhamba emoyeni. Ncuma, ubale, iminyaka, ni blessing zako, bandi kubuze, yinto impumelelo, emagameni ako, ewe, yes, Nkosi, thank you. Yeah, I was a bit nervous about that part. But as you can see, it's also on the screen for you guys to see there, the translation as well. I won't read that, as Ati, I believe, intended for those who understood to hear that, and those who didn't, as you will understand, to not. This beautiful invitation to meet yourself and Ruga beyond the now, to imagine a new reality, and to escape is intentionally spoken in Ruga's home language, isiXhosa. Because as Ruga notes, he wants those who understand to hear it. Of course, others will hear the voice but not recognize and understand it as an invitation, and are in some ways alienated from the opportunity to imagine along with �12𝘀𝘀. The idea of an invitation is interesting, specifically because in the exhibition, as you saw, the first thing that you see when entering the exhibition is an invitation to join us in that exhibition. Similarly, �12𝘀𝘀 also invites you to engage with him in the worlds that he creates through his art. The idea of the invitation is interesting, reminding me of the invitation that queerness has handed me. Through the experimentation with and investigation of my own queerness, I have undergone so many shifts that have continuously pushed me to reconsider and adjust my understanding of myself and the world in relation to my queerness, to heterosexuality, and the various systems of discrimination that were born out of colonialism. Noting that heterosexuality and whiteness go hand in hand in relation to the colonial agenda, the practice of being black and queer might be seen as a decolonial practice that upsets the heteropatriarchal systems we still live by. �12𝘀𝘀 himself says, somehow resistance to your entrance in a place or resistance to your expression for something is really what validates an identity. Without resistance, we are not really. And growing up gay, black, and non-Christian is kind of something that I love playing with. The resistance to my identity, �12𝘀𝘀 says, and making art out of that. And just to also add here that we had the opportunity to speak with 𝘎𝘀𝘀, not only over Zoom call to interview him for the exhibition, but we also had the opportunity to invite him for other reasons to the museum, but in so doing I had the chance to also speak with 𝘎𝘀𝘀, and so I'm not just pulling these thoughts out of thin air. Bearing in mind the quote, for this reason I argue that �12𝘀𝘀's invitation is only heard by some who can afford to take on the call to be radically queer, however that might look, and is not answered by all. Over the Rainbow by Atipata �12𝘀𝘀 is a short film that centers �12𝘀𝘀 as the versatile Queen Ivy from Azania, or Zania. The title of this piece, as cited by �12𝘀𝘀, is inspired by the name given to post-apartheid South Africa, the Rainbow Nation. Desmond Tutu had named the country the Rainbow Nation after the 1994 election, with the hope for a country that could unite despite the differences that were previously used to separate and segregate the citizens of South Africa. �12𝘀𝘀 explains how he was raised to believe that South Africa as a post-apartheid country would reach some kind of utopia, that utopia being the Rainbow Nation that Tutu manifests. Some might question what art, and more specifically queer art, can do to help the country's situation. And I think in relation to the exhibition, that was also a question that we had as co-curators. One of the things that came up, what does it mean to curate and create art in the time that we live in, when there's so many other urgencies that we need to also attend to? Given the perpetuation of heteropatriarchal practices and systems that take the form of hegemonic order, queer art can challenge this order using counter-hegemonic practices. Move in 2008, hope I'm pronouncing their name correctly, says, like other critical art, it gives voice to all those who are silenced within the framework of existing hegemony. Thank you so much. Thus both challenging the dominant symbolic order and contributing to the construction of new subjectivities. As Lewin and Move point out in the quote, the challenging of existing hegemony creates spaces for the marginalized to be heard, is a form of resistance that contributes to new ideas and reimaginations of our futures. This is seen in �12𝘀𝘀's work through the counter-narratives in his practice. In the counter-narratives in his practice, in the creation of Azania, which is inspired by stories �12𝘀𝘀 heard as a child living in pre-1994 South Africa. �12𝘀𝘀's childhood referenced in the work through the dompas, which belonged to his grandmother. These are just some screenshots from the film. The inclusion of this dompas serves as a reminder of apartheid and the systematic discrimination that black people were subjected to before the onset of democracy, but also a possible reference to Ruga's past growing up during apartheid. Furthermore, this object also references the inability to move around freely and without surveillance as a queer person might today. The Dompas, by extension, also references Ruga's introduction to 𝘎𝘢𝘢 in this politicized past. The idea of 𝘎𝘢𝘢, as mentioned previously, is something that Ruga borrows from conversations with his parents and sisters, and is noted that he is not able to take part in the imagination of 𝘎𝘢𝘢 just yet, because he was too young, but to attend the protests. However, this fuels a creative form of resistance and critique of South Africa that leads Ruga to create his own version of 𝘎𝘢𝘢. And just to also add here that what Ruga is doing is, as I mentioned, critiquing through creating a new South Africa, essentially, and trying to reimagine what exactly the Rainbow Nation would look like from his perspective. Further close-ups of Ruga's face reveal that he is in drag. The application of makeup on his face, creating new eyebrows while still sporting his mustache. This character, the versatile Queen Ivy, is a relatively new character at the time, having debuted Her Majesty the versatile Queen Ivy during a performance at the National Arts Festival titled The Elder of Azania. Queen Ivy is part of a long line of female monarchs from the Kingdom of Azania. Essentially, Ruga has quite a long, extensive group of works in which he creates different characters who are all part of this new world, and he is the only man in this world, but he essentially serves the women who are part of this lineage of queens that run the new South Africa. Queen Ivy stares into the mirror as a robotic male voice begins to echo the words to Brenda Fassie's Weekend Special. You don't come around to see me in the week. You don't have a chance to call me on the phone, but Friday night, yes, I know, yes, I know. I know I must be ready for you, just waiting for you. I'm no weekend special, weekend special. I'm sure we all know the song, as the Seko dances over there. Ruga refers to Brenda Fassie as a femme pop icon, a queer woman, as he thinks on the lyrics. He describes Fassie's Weekend Special as a chant of unrequited love that says, I am not going, I am staying. The lyrics, which start with, you don't come around to see me on the week, emphasizes the singer's thoughts of only being entertained by their partner on weekends, making them feel more like a good time weekend special rather than an all-week special. In this context of Ruga's work, this might be a reference to, or I see this as a reference to black queer South Africans' relationships with a country that offers them a promise of safety through the Constitution, while the people of the country still practice and perpetuate queerphobic rhetoric, behaviors, and ways of being. One might then link the experience of queerness to a weekend special, something that can be enjoyed over the weekend in clubs and queer spaces, as Anna mentioned. But once it leaves those spaces and leaves the weekend, it becomes a problem to the outer society. Further to this point, the idea of the promise, the supposed good time, can also be linked to this idea of a queer freedom in South Africa, as sometimes it is only on the weekend when we are in dark clubs moving around in the night that the Constitution's promise is in reach. Queen Ivy is seen reciting or lip-syncing along with the voice as the image of the dresser or the makeup station, and the figure slowly zooms out as women's voices also join in the robotic sing-song of the lyrics. Ruga describes the voice as disquieting, which I agree they are, because of the monotone nature they seem to command what they are saying rather than singing it as Fassie might have. I find it interesting to consider what it means to be robotically reinforced and command as a system might, and what it means in relation to queerness. Is the demand for more than just a weekend special a call for the freedom that the system works against, or is the weekend special a systematic device that keeps queerness in very specific parts of people's homes and private lives and between the walls of dark queer clubs? A new scene of Queen Ivy fades into our view as she begins to move side to side, swaying flamboyantly, dancing with her upper body and then with all of herself. Swinging and swishing her elongated sleeves across the screen and her face, she vogues and punches the air. She continues to dance alone in a soft mist. Then she is read, as if to demonize this performance of freedom. Suddenly the viewer sees her multiplied and then singular, her movements slowed down and flashing, cut and chopped as the chorus of 𝘎𝑚𝑖's voice grows to include more layers and grows in volume as the chorus climaxes. Stepping back to the Brenda Fassie reference, I find this scene to be particularly interesting, as Ruga is seen performing as a queen who expresses herself through dancing and bodily movements. I link this to the experience of self-expression, which is a rocky road, but also an extremely rewarding one. Queen Ivy celebrates herself or her freedom in this voyage. She is the weekend special. And so if we consider this scene, the performance, and the vanity scene, the pre-show moment before, I have the question to ask, what does it mean to produce and perform the role of the weekend special? Ruga notes in many interviews the importance of procession, and in relation to the title of Ruga's work, this can be seen as the journey to one's personal end of the rainbow, as a need to queer oneself becomes an epistemological practice that continues to evolve beyond what you imagine for yourself. Interestingly, in relation to this, I return to Ruga's words where he suggests that those who dream of utopia or the end of the rainbow, in this case, are the ones who may never reach it. While this may be seen in a more somber context, it can also relate to the ongoing search for more queer experiences, communities, and interactions. The ongoing journey to the other side of the rainbow is different for each who take it. For me, this has, for the most part, taken the form of unlearning internalized homophobia toward mine and others' femininity, as well as unlearning the shame of wanting to express my femininity physically through my body, dress, and through makeup. Of course, the categorization of these objects as either feminine or masculine perpetuates the binary. However, the act of placing feminine-oriented expressions onto the masculine body is another act of resistance against the system that demands men and women express their gender according to a set of rules. Other influences like the Cape Town ballroom and drag scene have also helped me to deconstruct my understanding of gender expression and helped me uncover my fear of feminine expression. And it is through these same avenues that my interest in drag and drag performance continues to grow. The next slide is just a picture of my expression, of my investigation into drag. I haven't shared this with anyone, so just, yeah. Yeah, so that's me practicing doing drag, essentially. I'm still very new to the experience of doing drag, and I haven't performed much, but yeah, it's something that I'm very interested in and looking to investigate how that can also be a creative practice as a practicing artist. Thank you. It's funny, when I actually perform, I don't look like that, so it's really annoying that when I practice, it's good, and then, yeah. Upon my arrival in Cape Town, one of the first things I did was to attend a ballroom function. And just to give some explanation, it's not ballroom in the sense of dancing like tangos and all of those things, but rather underground ballroom, which is a practice that originates from Harlem, New York, around the 70s, 60s or 80s, counter space for queer, Black and Latinx Americans, trans women, and queer people, where they were finally given space to perform in pageant-style competitions. And essentially, you are given the opportunity. There's a list of categories, and you walk those categories for your 10s, which is, if you did well, you get 10s. If you didn't, you get chopped. It's very harsh. I myself have been chopped a few times. It's not nice. While this was not my first time attending a ball, this was my first time that I could really ground myself in the experience and take in the landscape of queer expression from so many varying perspectives in the gender and sexuality spectrum. It was also here that I did my first drag performance after attending the first time I after attending the first time, I attended every ball that happened at the inner city in Cape Town, hence why Anna says I go out a lot. And so this is also actually research for me, but very fun research that does go with a cocktail every now and then. Then we have some images here. This was from the QP ball, which was held in March. Experience that I could actually share with Bulelwa, Anna, and one of the other fellows from the previous cohort, Rory, who also took those photos for me. Thank you, Rory. But I performed Whitney Houston's It's Not Right, but It's Okay here for this competition. Very scary, especially because it was my first time, but I managed to get my 10s and moved on to the second round. But I didn't win, unfortunately. One of my other friends beat me. It's okay. At least it's my friend. Yeah, okay, cool. It is through attending these balls as well as various drag shows at the infamous 021 social club in District 6 that my interest in shifting my gender expression and experimenting with drag began to really take over my resistance against heteronormativity. Throughout this process of discovery, there are moments that in retrospect are reflected in the narrative that Huga shares not only through Over the Rainbow, but also with other works that make up the kingdom, or queendom rather, of Azania. Visiting the Cape Town ballroom scene viewing the Cape Town ballroom scene as a queer utopia for myself and queer people in Cape Town, noting that there might be other spaces where queer people might find utopias. There are many parallels that one can draw between Huga's work and safe spaces that queer people have built to exist without discrimination. These are just a couple of images of some of the people that are seen walking at the balls. Just a short history. The Cape Town ballroom scene as it is now arguably finds its origins at 021 Club in 2017, where the late Curvin Vortain, known in the ballroom scene as Curvin Lacap, mother and founder of the House of Lacap, hosted the first ball. Today the ballroom scene in Cape Town is led by two main events, Spectrum, which is hosted by 𝘎𝘢𝘩𝘐𝑚, that's Cheshire over there, and as you can see we do have trophies. It's a very serious event. People take it really seriously. It's like very competitive, like even fighting on stage and stuff. But that's part of the fun. Cheshire is the mother of the South African chapter of the International House of Vineyard. So there's also houses where queer people who have lost or have been kicked out of their homes or don't necessarily have connections to their biological family can create families for themselves, and so what we call then our chosen families. And people fulfill the roles of mother, father, daughter, and so forth in those houses. And obviously it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or in between. It's more about the description of the role and fulfilling and doing that. Yes. The Cape Town scene is led by two main events, Spectrum, which is hosted by Cheshire Vineyard, and then the Legacy Ball hosted by the House of Lacap. Other houses and individuals or companies host smaller functions, which we call Kiki Balls, where participants who are not yet considered legends or are still beginners in the scene can compete and gain experience walking. Noting the origins of contemporary ballroom in New York during the 1970s, balls and ballroom culture and spaces exist firstly as safe houses for queer people of color, and secondly as spaces of resistance against the need to conform to society's expectations. It also comes from the desire for self-expression and community without judgment, which is similar to Huga's motivations behind Azania, as he says, Azania I created because I wanted to put myself in the dead center of a world and just bring everyone who doesn't feel like they belong in this world our elders have created for us. Furthermore, the creation of community that Huga presents in Azania, the family of reigning matriarchs, is reflected not only in Cape Town's ballroom scene, but similarly in the spaces in which Huga performs and presents his work. Before I get on to that next quote, I just also want to share these two images from the opening of Sala, where we were lucky to have drag queens who are drag queens in professional life, but also perform in the ballroom scene. And the drag queen on your guys' left, Inappropriate, who you will see in this image also there next to me, was also an active member of this community, and she's won multiple trophies, for example, for Vogue Femme. And she's what we would call a feminine performer, just because of the way that she moves her body. So there's a whole lot of categories and stuff also involved in all of this. And then the other performer is Madison Scar. And that was also a way for me to bring my community that I've created outside of the museum into the museum, and to also create spaces for queerness in the museum in a more radical way, but also to have fun in that activism, which is very important for me. I don't think activism always has to be as serious, because I think in today's world, having fun and expressing yourself is also something that is considered really, transgressive. Is that what you said? Cool. Am I still okay for time? I think I'm running out of time. I'm almost done. Okay. This is seen, as I said, the creation of community that Ruka presents in Azena is reflected not only in the Cape Town ballroom scene, but similarly in the spaces in which Ruka performs and presents his work. In 2018, Ruka opened Queens in Exile at What If the World in Cape Town, and Kapano Marocha wrote for Artrop the following: "The beauty and potency of the exhibition lies for me in the environment and psychosphere that it manages to generate. It is no secret that Cape Town's visual art scene is one dominated by white folk. The night of Ruga's opening, though still heavily attended by white folk, also managed to create an environment welcoming to many black and queer folk in the creative community. To walk into a room full of familiar black and queer chosen family is not an occurrence that happens often in the Cape Colony, and to be brought together around such stimulating and layered content that speaks to our collective history is such incisive and no reductive ways a gift. In this beautifully summed up experience, we see the power of Ruga's work in bringing together black and queer community as a disruption of whiteness and its spaces and cultures of elitism, much like the Cape Town ballroom does. Attending the ballroom functions myself has been such a privilege, and I've also been able to benefit from the experience of the queer spaces I frequent. While the Cape Town inner city is the queerest friendly space I have experienced, there is still something that I yearn for, that I return to the ballroom scene or 0-1 for. It is a queer experience that allows me to show up however I want, and allows me to enjoy myself without societal judgment, and further celebrate mine and others' queernesses." Turning back to Ruga's work, Makubenjalo repeats and is layered with more voices as it builds up. 5 ladies dressed in bright-colored church wear, or church-related clothing, I would say, are seen circling Ruga, who appears mummified in bandages, still wearing the makeup of Queen Ivy. Makubenjalo is the original outro of the last verse of the South African national anthem as composed by Enoch Sontonga in 1897. This was removed from the anthem and replaced with a verse from Distem. Makubenjalo begs God to save the nation of Africa. The plea, "Let it be until the end of time," is a plea for a country that protects the peace in the interest of all citizens and fixes the wrongs of the past. It is hope for those who sing it that better days may be coming. However, this is not the case, as the song is still sung today with even more weight behind it. Ruga's use of the song might be for similar reasons: a hope for freedom long overdue, a cry for help amongst a fading rainbow, or possibly the anthem of Azania that asks for an extension of utopia so that we can exist there and never leave. It is interesting that the audience is introduced to the Queen Ivy in the beginning in all her glory, and we watch her celebrate despite her loneliness until suddenly we are faced in the end with Ati's body and only her face. There's certainly a somber tone in these final moments of the video, as Ruga possibly wants to remind us of those who fought for the freedoms, although complicated, we have today. If you watch the video, there's also a scene where 𝙎𝘢𝘮𝑚 wears the headdress, and there's a projection of multiple different people from the past who were involved in different forms of activism, and that's what I'm referring to. This hymn's call for peace is elevated by the music as the music increases, and it feels as though the moment becomes somewhat joyous, more and more of 𝙎𝘢𝘮𝑚 is revealed. Here, ideas of undressing become somewhat joyous, as more and more of here the ideas of undressing a wound come to mind, possibly the wounds of the past that are still healing in South Africa for many people. Despite the wound, there is a hope for healing, for rebirth, and for reimagination. In closing, the camera jumps to a visual of the woman who are posed and covered in red lights, as well as a final shot of the clothing falling to the ground before the shot that you see before you of 𝙎𝘢𝘮𝑚 floats away into the distance. In so doing, the procession has ended and the weekend is over. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to just have a few minutes of reflection from the audience. We didn't really give you guys much time to ask questions. So anybody who has anything they'd like to say, add, ask. I know Anna still had a question to answer for Siseko. But yeah, anybody who wants to share anything, it doesn't have to be a question, just for a couple of minutes.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Just thank you so much for this incredible feeding. It's a comment question hybrid that I have for you all, which is something that I've been really interested that you keep sort of getting at today, is this way of thinking curating and thinking museums that kind of doesn't start with art objects. Like, I'm just trying to find, I've written all over this table. Where is it? Yeah, I'm just curious about your sort of thoughts on this type or mode of curating that is more interested in time, space, and experience than art objects itself. And if you could just sort of talk about, you've been talking about it all day, but that as a position, I suppose, is something I'm really curious about.
I'll start and then Anna will continue. I think, thank you for that insightful interpretation. For me at least, the curating doesn't start with art objects, although the art objects are essential. I think they create the shrine, but the shrine is for the people. And so for me, it has to always start with the audience, the people, who is coming through the doors, who do we imagine coming through the doors, especially people who wouldn't necessarily feel like they belong in a museum or feel comfortable in a museum, to make space, to shake the museum up, to make it comfortable for them. So for me, it's essential to start with the people, otherwise there's no point in what we're doing. That's my perspective, probably from an educational or CFAE standpoint.
Thank you, Mona. For me, what comes in mind is Gayatri Spivak, can the subaltern speak? Although Gayatri taught me a lot about how to position myself as the intellectual, especially because of the question of speaking on the behalf. So when she then says that perhaps the role of the curator or the intellectual is to create conditions from which something that cannot be heard can then begin to speak, right? So for me, I am not trying to say that the artworks are subaltern, but what I see as common sense is that the artwork is speaking, but because we are not trained to hear, they cannot be heard. So I go by that understanding curating as this process of trying to create the conditions, but creating the conditions from which something that cannot be heard begins to speak also somehow speaks to our inability to hear. So when we're speaking about subalternity, Gayatri tells us that we need to learn how to hear, but the learning is not something easy, so we need to learn how to learn to hear. So my approach is always like that. How can I learn to learn from these artworks? But it's my special interventional thinking is on creating the conditions. I have something to say. Evaan, I also forgot to say that Evaan is a beautiful writer. I really enjoyed your writing. It's so accessible and it speaks deeply in my heart. I really enjoyed your work. We are learning each other's work today. That's why. Yeah, but thank you so much. It was really nice, and especially how it ended. And you said, yeah, I think it's on purpose, but the end was end, and now we're also ending, so I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, the weekend's almost over, literally. So, no, sorry. There's still a whole Sunday. If I could also answer Rory's question while we're waiting for another question, or is there one already?
Yeah, just...
Oh, go ahead.
Hello. Okay, I don't know how this, but... Because you mentioned how you basically the past silent for Black people. I'm trying to understand with that how do you think the healing will take place for the future, basically, because I'm struggling to understand how the healing is able to exist without having to first understanding what needs to be healed. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Preach, sister. So perhaps I didn't go deep to explain why I said that Blackness is silenced when we speak to space. It's not that it's similar to what I was saying about Spivak. It's not that it's silence. It's just not in the books. It just didn't survive in the imagination, in the white imagination. It was distorted. So how it survives, and what I think is interesting, is how we learn to listen to the silences. And then we also, on the process of having one only option to articulate ourselves this hegemonic way, we often don't consider those silences because we don't have enough vocabulary. We don't know how to. It's a process to know how to then recontextualize something that was erased and something that functions with that erasion as like, I don't know how to explain. So what survives then from those silences is the orality, is the whole oral transmission of things, and then those oralities, they will not necessarily survive in an epistemic that renders them as untrue or too much of an imagination or nonsense or beyond sanity. So it's not that it's interesting. It's there. You just have to learn how to see.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to each one of you and your presentations today. I somewhat want to defend our curatorial process with Rory, and it's a very nice prompt, thank you. But just from how we worked from the early processes was really looking at art very intensively, and so through these layers of looking constantly. And Sala, as you see, came from a particular passion from you towards, initially especially, to two works in the collection. So Sala has come around these kind of what then became triangulations between artworks as well, while these simultaneous conversations around curatorial listening and the theoretical frameworks that has been talked through, and the subject positions of each of the curators into that process. So I just want to say that it was definitely that art was very central, but parallel into it. And I think from the presentations, it's really, I'm somewhat not surprised, but it's amazing also to see that, you know, Bulelwa and Evaan, that you also chose to go deep into those two artworks, and that features very much into that thinking. But yeah, just wanted to posit that. But thank you.
Hi, all again. Essentially, my prior question has kind of answered itself through my doodles on this table, where it's led me to the notion of render. I think that's what struck, right? That idea of projection, where even I look at the mountain, the sort of man-made excavations, the notion of render being a resource of excavation to create space for those urgencies, that they don't necessarily have to all be contained in one place. This sort of idea that the contemporary space now is being implicated, being held accountable to redress or address the very real sort of systemic, I guess, absences that have existed in prior historic institutions. But Evaan's conversation led me to the notion of taking things seriously, right? In that moment, walking a ball, yes, I have walked the ball sometimes, this idea of taking seriously your participation, but not necessarily seriously the implication on your identity. This idea of titles and names embodying versus as a descriptor. This idea of queerness, not necessarily as but a space of, I guess, revolution or activism, but as a state of being that in and of itself is an exercise to find one's way to regulate themselves in society. I guess in tying all that all together, the sort of question, or I guess, I don't know, the sort of questioning statement I have is that idea of titles and names. You know, we say museum. No one can agree on what a museum is. This idea of museums being responsible to the public. What does responsibility to the public look like? Are we meant to, you know, make spaces comfortable? Or are we supposed to give people a lens with which to navigate that discomfort? How far does that responsibility extend? And so to you, I might pose, what has the museum looked like to you at the beginning and what it looks like today?
I have an answer to that. In the first couple of weeks when we were starting, I remember we did a task with Thandazani, I think it was, where we had to write what we'd like to see in the museum. And something that I wrote, I asked myself where the queerness was in the museum. I think I hadn't looked properly at that point yet, but I was looking for overt forms of queerness, and I can say that throughout my time here, I managed to push that agenda very nicely, and to the point where I was able to bring people into that space. And so I would say that the museum has changed for me in that sense, that I think like I said, I experience queerness as a radical something, and so for me it is a practice more than just a sexuality or a self-presentation. So in that sense, I think the change for me has been that I've seen that there is space to bring queerness into the museum. I mean, it has been here always. We see it in the collection works even. But there is also space to bring the living, breathing persons and people who make up those spaces and others and outside worlds into the space. So yeah, I think it's just about being active in doing so. Often we might see things as blockages, but then in the doing, you actually come out with a better result. As Ati would say, the procession. And process is also a big part of his work. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
lost the thought. Oh, it's back. So in the beginning, I think when we were like attending classes at UWC, we sort of encountered all of these like histories and concepts and sort of ideas around the museum that sort of sat uncomfortably within us. But just very briefly, there's something that 𝘎𝘢𝘭𝘢 said to us during our insights with her, and we were there like complaining essentially about the history of the museum. And she said that in a way to reframe our thinking about the museum, we so often sit with the absence that we cannot see the presence. So yeah, that's something that I sort of am grappling with.
Thank you so much, Siseko. Like, you've made me think a lot with what you've said, and I wanted to add that I think in the beginning I used to walk into the Zeitz MOCAA like I walked into a temple. You know, you walk in and you're like overcome in some way by this beautiful building, and you go through the exhibition space. For me, it's sacred, but it's also a performance in some way. So I had this curiosity. I was like, I want to pull down the curtain and see what's happening behind, and show the people. That was my, I don't know, something that was driving me. And now that I'm behind the curtain and you see the complex processes that go into making the exhibitions, into making the sacred, obviously I have such a deep respect for the work. But also I see how it is so privileged to be a visitor rather than a worker in some way. And you get to see and experience the magic and the abracadabra and the wonders and the beauties and the glories and the transcendence without knowing all the nitty-gritty that goes into it. So I have a newfound appreciation for not knowing, actually, and for not being, like, just for seeing the performance for what it is. So it's an interesting thing to come around to, yeah.
For me, when I think of my relationship with this building from when I arrived until today, for me, I remember when I first proposed an exhibition, I proposed an exhibition called The Informalities of Fallacy, and I covered all the walls with curtains. I didn't want to see any walls of the museum, and I took down all the walls that could be taken down for us to create the space. So when I arrived and I put sand on the ground, I was denying what it is. I was refusing to see it as it is and as a static thing. And then when my thinking started to go along with my colleagues' thinking, with storm thinking, somehow the curtains, they still exist, but they open up for the walls. And I started to see the walls differently, not as something that I constantly have to fight or hide or try to go beyond, but also as support. So some of the artworks, they are supported by these walls that at the beginning I was desperately trying to break free from. So for me, I see the museum as actually a structure, an infrastructure, a platform from which my thinking can begin to take shape, can collaborate, can grow. So I'm really happy that you are making me reflect about my relationship with this building, and yeah.
Thanks, Siseko, for that question. I think in the beginning, and this is perhaps informed by like the application process, where you have to say, as a fellow, you have to say, what department would you like to be placed in? And so you sort of see it as like roles. You see it as like a division, and you don't know what happens on the other side. And it's been interesting to see it from the other side, to be behind the curtain, as Mona has said, and not see like an alienation in those things, and see a kind of like synergy or symmetry that happens, or that kind of facilitates the production of what the visitor sees, or what the visitor walks in to see. So in that way, I would say it's a kind of site of being and a site of experimentation. And I think for our experience, it's also been like a site of like radical experimentation with the idea of Sala. And I think that's an interesting thing maybe to think with and to tinker with, is to view the museum as a site of experimentation. I think because before, and especially when we did the history course, we were very removed, because you're reading about histories of museums, histories of museum experiments, what has worked and what has failed, and you don't know the inner workings of it. So here you can kind of see that this is what it means to conduct an experiment. These are the ingredients that go into it. These ingredients react in ways that you never thought would be possible, or maybe other kinds of things are produced in ways you didn't think would result. So yeah, I think in that way it's been very interesting.
Okay, I think that's where we'll cut it for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Before we end, we just have to do a couple of votes of thanks. I have the pleasure of thanking 𝘎𝘢𝘭𝘢 and Siraj Rasool. They are both the respective heads of the museum, 𝘎𝘢 and Siraj of the history department. And I just want to say on behalf of the fellows, thank you to them for coming up with this concept for the fellowship, for giving us this opportunity to research, to learn, to see, to listen and look, and for exposing us to new things and even old things that we could revisit. And then in that same vein, I'd also like to thank the AKO and the Mellon Foundation, who without we would not be here, who are the kind funders, generous funders of the program. Of course, because we live in a capitalist world, this would not be possible without them. So we are extremely grateful to them for for that. Yeah, and so I'll pass on to Bulelwa next.
I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the UWC faculty. Specifically, like to thank Rory Bester, Ridwan Musaj, and Leslie Witz for, I guess, taking us along in your thinking in your respective courses, the curatorship course, the museum's public history and heritage course with Leslie, and the historiography class with Ridwan. They've massively, obviously, contributed to our research projects and also to SALA as a way of thinking and a way of being curatorially. We'd also like to thank our supervisors for our research, each one of our supervisors for really being supportive in quite a difficult process of doing a research essay and also co-curating an exhibition. So thank you for being here as well, to all of the UWC faculty, to support us, Connie Benson as well, Bongani, if I'm missing anyone, but thank you so much for your support.
And we own our deepest thanks to our supervisors at the museum, people that received us with open arms, who went from the beginning until the end with us. Very generous people, I'll name them. Lee Burgers, Esther Henderson, Liesel Hartman, Tato Mogozi, Tandazani Dlakama, and Julia Kabat, that is not here, is my direct supervisor. I wish she was here. But so we own these people. Our deepest thank you. Thank you so much for showing us the way, for guiding us, for trusting us, for all the patience, everything. We will take you forever in our hearts. At the same time, we also wanted to thank all the Zeitz MOCAA team, everyone, every single security guard that I was so surprised when they knew they started to call me by my name. I was like, when did you know my name? But they all take care of us. I feel like we are on the security guards' heads and they are in our heads. And yeah, we thank the whole team, and we thank the front of house. We thank the team that cleans the museum. We thank the guys that come and clean these glasses. There's these guys that comes all with the proper clothes. We thank them. And yeah, that's my point. I think it's Buhle.
I'd just like to add one person to that list of thank yous, and that's 𝘎𝘢𝘮𝘎, who is the fellowship coordinator and supervisor. I think your role is very necessary, and it's a comfort knowing that you're here and having you here. So thank you. Okay, I am thanking the people in the Cape Town art ecosystem. At the beginning of the fellowship, I lie to you not, we pounded the pavement, visiting visiting every gallery and experimental art spaces in the city. And that was a huge site of germination for us as well, to see how people do things differently, to see what people are experimenting with, and to hear people speak as well, and to understand some of their orientation to things. And that's also been an ongoing thing in the fellowship. And we would like to thank all those spaces for hosting us and for continuing to engage with us in different ways. Thank you.
Okay, and lastly, and most gratefully, thank you to everyone here, our audience, our visitors, members, everyone who came. It made such a difference to have you in this space, and the event actually booked out like within hours, I think, of it being published on the internet. So we were so moved by that, and we're so honored to have you here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your participation and your questions. I'm looking forward to looking at what you've doodled and written on these pages, and you're part of our archive and our fellowship now. So thank you very, very much. And have a lovely summer's afternoon. I think you should go to the beach or do something not intellectual. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bulelwa, for the playlist.